Let's get started. So, welcome. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out on a Tuesday evening to join us at the Center for Nonviolent Solutions, this event. My name is Sean Minahan. I'm chair of the board, and I want to welcome you all here and just take a quick second to give a little shout out to Gina from our board, uh, Rochelle and Claire, our wonderful staff, and Marge, our invaluable volunteer. So I'll just say a little bit for those of you who aren't as familiar with our mission about CNVS. Officially founded in 2010, CNVS works to build a culture of peace in Worcester, Massachusetts by educating people about the history and efficacy of nonviolence as a strategic response to conflict. We've run numerous programs for middle and high school students in Worcester, as well as a number of educational events for the general public, people of all ages. We've been really blessed and lucky to have a number of great speakers and guests join us for those events, which brings me to tonight's speaker, who's Robin Wildman, joining us this evening from down in Rhode Island. Robin Wildman has been a senior level Kingian nonviolence practitioner and teacher for 20 years and a public school teacher for 28 years, recently retired. Presently, she is the executive director of the nonprofit organization Nonviolent Schools Rhode Island, which is a result of her desire to train those who work in the field of education in Kingian nonviolence so that they can work towards institutionalizing the philosophy and conflict resolution strategies. She has conducted workshops, given lectures, and trained hundreds of adults and children in methods to address and reconcile conflict, and used by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She is the author of a Kingian nonviolence curriculum, used nationally and internationally, and a post-training reflection journal. Robin has worked closely for 20 years with her mentor and the honorary board chair of Nonviolent Solutions Rhode Island, legendary civil rights leader Bernard Lafayette Jr. So without any more ado, I'll turn it over to Robin. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me. I can see some people right now on their screen. I appreciate that. If you are able to show your face, that is helpful for me to put a face to a name. If you're not able, I completely understand with complications from Zoom and invasion of whatever else it is you need to get done right now. So I'm just happy that everybody's here. I'm going to share my screen off and on just to give you a little bit of extra knowledge about what I will be talking about. So the presentation is Nonviolence, Conflict, Reconciliation in Education, also known as Building the Beloved Community. I will be talking about both of those things this evening. So I'm pretty sure everybody has their name in the screen. If you want your pronouns, that's fine. But really in chat, I was hoping that you could just write a little bit about yourself, why you were motivated to attend today's presentation. If you are in some way associated with a school or an education, please let me know that as well. But most importantly, why are you here? So that would be a good start for all of us together. So I'll give you a few minutes. If you don't know where chat is, it's at the bottom of your screen, I believe, for most computers. So what motivated you to attend? While everybody's doing that, I'll just mention the agenda for tonight. I'll be talking about my own personal journey to Kingian nonviolence and how that found me and how I found it, and then talking about nonviolent schools, and then talking about the beloved community as well. Thank you, Claire, for being here. We appreciate, despite what you may think the way you look, we are happy that you're here and able to participate behind your screen. Well, it's nice to have everybody here on this very day, which is the International Day of Peace. So isn't it wonderful that we can all be together and for a common purpose, which is to talk about ways to get to peace, because you can't just wish for peace. We have to actively work towards it. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so I'm going to get started. The first thing I'm going to do, I think this will address a little bit about what Claire was mentioning in chat, which is knowing a little bit more about what is Kingian nonviolence. Oh, Mike, I just read what you wrote. I've been on the fringes of being connected with Springfield Public Schools through some people that maybe you know, so we can chat later. So I'm going to share my screen again because I have a really quick slide. What is Kingian nonviolence? So those of us who practice Kingian nonviolence know first that it is a strategy-based practice, but also is based in principles or a value system. And these all have come from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., my mentor, Bernard Lafayette Jr., was a strategist for Dr. King. And in his own right, as a college student, he integrated lunch counters in Nashville. He was a freedom rider. And at the end of Dr. King's life, he had appointed Bernard as the director of the Poor People's Campaign that was to take place in DC. The morning of Dr. King's assassination, Bernard was with him, and Dr. King said, Bernard, we need to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence. Bernard left to go to DC and learned that Dr. King had been assassinated, and he has committed his life to spreading this practice of Kingian nonviolence throughout the world. So there are King centers all around the world. Here in the United States, there are different nonviolent centers. And I like to look at my practice as being like a direct descendant of Dr. King himself. And so I've dedicated my life to continuing that charge that he delivered to Bernard Lafayette on April 4th, 1968. So as I said, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, Kingian nonviolence is based on strategies to reconcile conflict. There are 6 steps that we follow, and then 6 principles, and I'll share those with you in a little bit. We are different in our practice because we don't resolve conflict, we reconcile conflict. So the difference is, and I read this from a book, and I can't remember the author, but I like the way she put it. Conflict resolution means that the conflict has already happened and it's reactive. But Kingian nonviolence practice is to do things to develop community, a beloved community, as Dr. King referred to, so that conflicts are not uncomfortable and people have strategies that they can use to address these conflicts in a way, in the way that honors all people's needs and can restore some form of a civil relationship at the very least. Okay, so that in a nutshell is Kingian nonviolence. So as I said, Bernard Lafayette is my teacher and mentor. He's our honorary board chair. I met him in 2001. I spent 28 years as a public school educator, fifth grader, perpetual fifth grader. Never graduated from fifth grade. And I was team teaching with the police department in my town. It was a program called Community Works. So each month a police officer would come in and we would teach a lesson. How do we keep our communities safe, kids? And it was kind of like that. The police captain brought in a guest, and I later found out who it was. It was Bernard Lafayette Jr., who had just been brought to the University of Rhode Island to be the director for the Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies. And the students wanted him to come back and visit the classroom. And so he came actually every week. And he came once a week and started teaching the students and myself about this practice, about conflict, about Dr. King, about the civil rights movement. And one day, one of the students said to him, "We want you to take us to where Dr. King did his work." Now we're in Rhode Island, and you know where that was, right? So Doc Lafayette said, "Well, you need to raise $20,000. He just threw out, a number. And in 3 months, the kids raised $20,000 with their parents. So he took 20 students and their parents and some teachers and newspaper reporters. And we went to Atlanta and Montgomery and Selma and Birmingham and Tuskegee. And it was life-changing for everybody, but particularly for me as a teacher. And when I came back, I thought, well, I think I was a pretty darn good teacher before, but now I have some information that is really important for me to share with my students forever after. And that was Kingian nonviolence. And so I began incorporating into all aspects of the day, into literature, teaching history, this idea of conflict being a normal everyday occurrence, but how we choose to address conflict can either improve a situation or explode a situation, make people happy or make people angry and upset. And so that was great. And then in that school, that was a K-5 school. Every year my students would team up in small groups and they would adopt another classroom, and each month they would go and teach the other students the module that they had just learned from me. So for example, if they were going to teach the 6 principles to a kindergarten, some of the times they would create a puppet show, or they would have the kids learn a song. And so over the years at that particular school, it was common knowledge throughout the school that Kingian nonviolence was the language we were using. And then on the saddest day, I got transferred to another school. I had to leave that school after 19 years, still in the same town. It was kind of a contentious move because the superintendent took all of the 5th grade teachers out of the elementary schools and put them in a building that had 6th grade middle school on the upstairs floor and 5th grade elementary on the downstairs floor. Sounds confusing? It was. And so I went back to square one with just teaching my own students about Kingian nonviolence, kind of doing my own thing. And then one day, one of my colleagues said, "How come your students are so good at solving their problems?" And so I talked about Kingian nonviolence, and she said, "We want to learn that. Can you teach it to us?" And so that year, I did 4 separate teacher trainings, and my teacher trainings are 20 hours. So these are educators who donated their own time after school to attend these 20-hour trainings. And after that first year, I trained 40 staff, including the principal and the vice principal, the nurse, art teacher, the music teacher, teaching assistants, special educators. And they decided that they wanted that school to be a Kingian nonviolence school. And that's what it became. And over the 6 years that this process took, because it's a lengthy process, I would say it took 3 years to really infiltrate the language, the common language that's so essential in a school, the 6 principles that were being practiced. And we did all kinds of different things. We had monthly assemblies with a Kingian nonviolence theme. We held a student art contest where students painted murals on the walls in the main hallway representing the 6 principles. We had parent workshop nights. We created a pamphlet for every family to have with the Kingian language in it. And most importantly, I worked with the vice principal who was in charge of discipline to transform that discipline model into a rehabilitative one rather than a punitive one, which is typically present in most schools. So, and then I retired. And when I retired, the principal and the vice principal also left. And so what really has been impactful is knowing that in order to transform a school, it's a top-down, bottom-up model that works the best. And so during the last 2 years of my school career, I thought that I needed to repurpose myself for when I retired. And so I founded Nonviolent Schools Rhode Island. And our mission is to teach educators K through college about Kingian nonviolence and how to teach it to their students so that exponentially we can grow the beloved community. And so we've been in existence since 2018. We've worked with 10 different schools throughout Rhode Island. We're starting with another school in Providence right now, yesterday. And we also do institutes so that we can bring teachers and administrators from other places together to learn about Kingian nonviolence. And one of the things that's different about our organization is that after we do training, if we have a critical mass of educators in one building, we place a mentor in the building to work with the teachers and the administration to implement however they see fit within their school, Kingian nonviolence. And so, yeah, that's the work that's been happening. So I'll stop if there's any questions before I continue on. I see Matthew's hand up. Yep. If you want to just unmute because I cannot see everybody. So go ahead, Matthew. Hi.
I'm wondering if hi, it sounds like you've done a lot for sure. I'm wondering if the curriculum that you use is available and what is that?
So I'll go backwards just a little bit. So Bernard Lafayette created a leadership training program for adults. And that's what he uses to train around the world and et cetera. When I came back from the civil rights trip, I asked Doc if I could write a curriculum so that I could use it not only to teach educators, but also put in it lessons and activities that would help them teach their students. And so that's what I wrote. And we use that in our teacher training. It's not typically the kind of thing that you could give to somebody and they could just use it without going through the training, because it's like you do the training and you look at the manual kind of simultaneously. Like if I'm teaching you about the 3 emotional levels of conflict, you learn that, and then in the manual, it's got information about that and some activities, if that makes sense.
So the manual is for training teachers.
Yes. Who are going to then use the lessons that are in the manual to teach their kids. Because I kind of felt like I was teaching 20, 23 kids a year, big deal. How could I exponentially expand this wonderful ability to address conflict? Oh, I got to do the teachers, not the kids. But we also do a youth leadership training for middle and high school, doing the same training with middle and high school students. And so the school that we're starting with now in Providence is going to simultaneously do a teacher training and a youth training. And then we're going to bring the teachers and the youth together for some of the sessions, which is really exciting. That's a middle school.
Great.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Any other questions? Okay. So this is a picture of Dr. Lafayette. Well, pictures, as you can see, multiple pictures. So this is he and his wife, Kate Lafayette. This is them visiting my classroom at my school. And this is Doc with Martin Luther King, obviously. And this is one of the 6 principles mural that students painted in my school. And so when he came to visit one year, we took this photo, which I thought was pretty cool. So why Kingian nonviolence? So there's different methods of nonviolence, as I'm sure you're all aware. And this happens to be the one that I learned and that I practice. I'm not closed-minded or opposed to other styles of nonviolence for sure. What I do like about Kingian nonviolence, particularly for teaching educators and students, is that the information is not hard to understand. It's easy to grasp. We teach collaboration as a method to address conflict rather than compromise, although sometimes compromise is the best solution in a particular case. The goal is to collaborate with your opponent to the best of your ability. That common language that I talked about, the reconciliation piece. So we know that restorative justice is kind of a buzzword. We prefer Kingian nonviolence to be the buzzword because there's a lot of work to do to front load before students understand why I should want to reconcile with my opponent who hurt me. So the principles that we follow are really the reason why. So I'm going to show you those principles in a second. So let's see. Okay. So I got a lot of stuff on my screen. Hold on one second. I got to close this. Okay. So Dr. King wrote a book called Stride Toward Freedom after the Montgomery bus boycott. And one of the chapters that we have our trainees read is called Pilgrimage to Nonviolence. You can find it on the internet. I highly recommend it. And it's Dr. King talking about his journey to nonviolence. And if you don't know, Dr. King studied a lot of different philosophers from when he went to college at the age of 15 and on throughout his life. And he would find pieces that he agreed with and pieces that he did not agree with. But the pieces that he did agree with for any particular philosopher, he started to kind of combine different parts, a little from here, a little from here, came up with this philosophy, never imagining that that it would actually be used in life. It was like a belief system until the Montgomery bus boycott. And so he wrote this book talking about the boycott. And in this chapter, he came up with 6 principles. So Dr. Lafayette and his partner, David Jensen, who wrote the training manual for adults, took out pieces from this writing of Dr. King and codified these 6 principles. They were kind of wordy a little bit for kids. So some of them I kept the same, and some of them I asked Doc if I could kind of make it kid friendly, and with his permission, I did. And so here they are. So as you look at these, you can see how a school that is using this as a belief system, these aren't rules. That's what makes Kingian nonviolence in a school very different, because we're not telling kids they have to follow rules. We're asking them to practice these principles. And the reason why is principle 2, right here, that we all want to be existing in a place where we are valued and respected and loved. And even if we do something wrong, we aren't kicked out. We're not thrown out of that beloved community. We are rehabilitated so that we can be full participants in that community, and so that we can reach our greatest human potential. And that's what these principles are about. And then the next slide shows you those 6 steps. So they're really easy to follow for children who have small problems, but they also work for great big problems. And so they're called steps, but they're not linear. We always start with information gathering. We say suspend your first judgment and gather information. Your first judgment might be true, but it might not be. And so the only way to find out is to gather information. These two kind of are connected. While I'm gathering information, I'm educating myself, but I also may need to take this information and educate somebody else. And then I go to this step, which is personal commitment. And I say to myself, do I have the energy, the time, the strength, the stick-to-itiveness to address this conflict and make sure it reaches reconciliation? And if I say yes, then negotiation is my goal. And that would be a win-win for everybody. That's where the collaboration comes into play. A direct action you only use if negotiation fails. And the goal of a direct action is to get people back to negotiation. So in small conflicts, you wouldn't even use these. You could just have a misunderstanding. Kids are spreading rumors. I thought she said, no, I didn't. You said this. No, I meant that. Okay, let's clear this misunderstanding up and go right to reconciliation. So we never leave out reconciliation. Sometimes you can't reconcile with somebody. So what do? I say you leave the door open in the hopes that someday it might happen. So if you have like a family member who stops speaking to you and you've tried to do these things, this is it right here, leaving that door open, not saying, oh, I'm done with so-and-so, but I hope one day we can have a civil relationship. So I'm going to stop for questions again. No questions, or if there is, just unmute. Okay. All right. So I guess the next question is, how do you implement this in a school? It takes in the beginning a small team of teachers who want this to happen in their school, and they attend a training, they work with a mentor, and they figure out, how do these pieces of Kingian nonviolence fit in our particular school, in our particular situation? And it might look different depending on where the school is, student body, etc. So we've done work in rural, suburban, and urban schools. That is not a factor. And I would have to say that often it's the parents, sometimes in a suburban school, that might be more of a roadblock than any place else. Particularly in this day that we're in today. Not this very day, but 2021. So you can transform a school in different ways. So I'm going to share my screen again. I think I'll go backwards to this slide. So I just wanted to talk about conflict. So I know that conflict is uncomfortable for people for the most part, and either you're uncomfortable with it and you might ignore conflict or try and avoid it. You know, you're the peacemaker, you always try and make things okay. Or you might be confrontational, where you're more the aggressor in a conflict and raising your voice and making your opinions heard regardless of how other people feel. And sometimes you're more comfortable with some people addressing conflict than others. But what we know about conflict is that it's neutral. There's nothing in a conflict itself by itself that we need to be afraid of. It's when people's emotions get involved that it can get sticky and messy. So if we keep in mind that conflict is neutral and it's an everyday occurrence, it becomes less of a fear factor, I think, for some people. So these are just different ways that people try and address conflict, none of which are effective, and particularly effective in the long term. So we know that oftentimes when conflicts get heated, it's because there's some kind of past history involved that's brought into the conflict. And that's why we want students and staff to address conflicts as they come up so that that past history isn't dragged in, not dragged into the school building, between colleagues in a school, etc. That people have the courage to address conflict. And that's what that principle 1 said, nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. It does take courage, but guess what? Fear is the fuel for your courage. It's okay to be fearful, but we don't want fear to paralyze us. We want fear to propel us towards that courageous act of walking up to somebody and saying, hey, it seems like things are sticky between us. Can we have a conversation about it? So the next slide that I wanted to show you is how to transform a school. So this was my school, Broad Rock Middle. And we had signage out front and we were always posting things about nonviolence. So not only the kids and parents would see it, but people in the community driving by would also get to see, you know, and think, hey, what's going on in that school? And so it was really a conversation starter oftentimes. The top-down, bottom-up training is really important. It's not effective enough to have staff do this training, but the people at the top need it too, and maybe sometimes more so, because they're leading the charge. And if they're speaking the language to the students and parents, it's all the more effective. And I know that my principal had said on multiple occasions that this training helped her be a better communicator with parents who had concerns and issues. The action planning is important. So a big thing in schools is social emotional learning, and states have standards that teachers have to address in some form of a lesson. Kingian Nonviolence addresses all those standards because it is social emotional learning. It's life skills, communication, leadership, it's all kinds of things. It's important not to just teach the students, but the families too. We get that common language. We do a lot of community building circles in classrooms, which are really important for building relationships, because really underlying all of this is building solid, loving relationships, teachers and staff to students, and teachers to teachers, everybody in that school community. And then finally redefining and remaking that discipline system, because if you're asking people to practice those 6 principles, but you're punishing kids for things that they've done, that goes against all of the things that you've taught for Kingian nonviolence, and then it doesn't become believable to the kids. So this is an example of something that we do with schools, and this has to do with that social emotional learning piece. So we use this icon of the umbrella. Kingian nonviolence is the umbrella that encompasses everything that has to do with your soul, your spirit, your mental health, your emotional health. And this was from my school. These were all of the district mandates for social emotional stuff. And we were like, okay, this is like way too much for everybody. So what we did was we looked at all those things and we infused Kingian language into what we were required to do by the district. So we made the Kingian language the priority, and the things like PBIS or this anti-bullying program that was horrible, that was less important than the Kingian lessons that we were teaching to kids. And we could say to the district, oh, we are teaching anti-bullying. We are doing restorative justice. It just looks different. So, yeah, I have not found an anti-bullying program that works, and we're not anti anybody. So anti-bullying means we are against bullying, but it also typically makes the bully the bad guy, and the victim is uplifted by everybody, and nobody listens to the story of the person who bullies. And in our new discipline model, we get input from everybody involved in a conflict, which is new for kids who act out typically, because usually nobody asks them what happened. Why did you feel the need to be aggressive? You know, did something happen before that? And so it's a lot more effective when you're asking everybody involved for their side. And that's what we've done with our transformative, rehabilitative methods to address conflict. So I would like to stop and take a sip of water and see if anybody has a question.
I have a question.
Hooray!
Yes, hi, thank you very much. That was very inspiring. My question to you is, have you tried implementing this program in group home situations? And the reason I ask is because I'm a volunteer worker with kids in group homes, and sometimes the tensions is a light way of putting it, but the extreme emotional and other violence that happens within these spaces that are meant to be protective, safe spaces for kids is just very disheartening. And so listening to you talk, I was thinking of how wonderful it would be if there were community building circles or some kind of program within the group home situation where the staff didn't look at the kids that are there as they call clients, and then, you know, the language that is used, the kids are put in restraints, and we have young 12 and 13-year-olds who tell me, I'm now in repair, which means that I was punished, I was put in restraints, now I'm facing, you know, the restorative piece of whatever it is that they call repair. So it's extremely heartache inducing. So this has been great listening to you.
Well, that's great, Gina. I'm so glad you brought that up, because when you started saying group home, in my mind, I'm thinking family. That a group home can be structured so that it's like a family. And we know that families have great conflicts. I heard whenever we do role plays for conflicts, like we act out a conflict and then the students practice using those 6 steps. Sibling to sibling conflicts, some of the things I heard were quite frankly horrifying, the physical beatings and all that kind of stuff. So I think of a group home like a family, and wouldn't it be more impactful to treat those children as people, not clients, but humans that need love? They don't need punishment. And so what people need to think about, even in a school, but also in a group home, is how is that punishment system working for you? Because I'm sure you have repeat offenders that just keep repeating the same behaviors because you're not teaching them a different strategy. That's what we do in our newly formed rehabilitative system. It's teaching strategies, it's teaching nonviolent strategies. And one of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm listening to you, Gina, are the adults, that the adults haven't been taught how to address conflict. So how can we expect them to do that with kids? They don't know how to do it themselves, right? And that's the state of where we're at in society. And you can start in the nuclear family and just exponentially grow that to community, policing, government, politics, all of it. Who is teaching our people, our humans, about conflict and how to address it? So we go to that fight or flight. Those are not the only choices. Nonviolence is the third way. We got to teach that to all our people as much as we can. So yeah, I think I would love to do work in a group home. I think that would be a great before and after case study of, here are these kids, here's how we used to address them, and here is the outcome versus now we practice Kingian nonviolence. Everybody knows it, and here are our outcomes. Because I think adults who are in that situation, they're frustrated and angry at the kids for acting the way they act. And the kids are acting the way they're acting because nobody's teaching them anything different.
Yeah, and the kids also come with a lot of baggage themselves. They literally, some of them have been in the womb when their mothers have been kicked in the belly or something else. So violence has been a way of life for them, even prenatally. So it's hard for the kids to know anything different unless they've been loved, and then they're in the group home in the first place because their parents are out of the picture. So when the adults in charge also do the same thing, it's a soul-crushing experience. So I don't know where to begin with this, but I am going to approach the group home that I volunteer at and see. I'm not super confident that they're going to be even open to hearing this, but if they would, wouldn't it be great? Just so much better than the situation.
Well, maybe that's the approach. Maybe the approach is, what if there was something that we could do here that would make this a happy place, and a place where staff wants to come to work because things are a lot easier for them in the long run. It's the same thing with teachers. Teachers don't want to waste time on discipline. Okay, then you got to do something different. Otherwise, you're wasting teaching time, disciplining kids, and that doesn't work and it's not effective.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there other questions?
So Robin, I actually had a couple of questions. One was, could you talk a little bit about how the community building circles worked at your school? And then also, I wondered about the the age to begin? I mean, you sort of got involved as a fifth grade teacher, and it sounds like a lot of your work has been sort of from the fifth grade level and up. But I wondered about younger kids and how involved any of them have become in any of your experience.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, it's K through college, and so
Right.
when we
Okay.
train teachers in teachers come from an elementary school,
Mhm.
typically K through 4 or 5, depending on the school. And so I have a separate manual for K through 2 where the activities are obviously different. They're for little kids.
Yeah.
And we don't teach the whole big thing to K through 2, but if you think about a school, if they start teaching certain aspects in K, and then they add something new in first grade and second grade, by the
Right.
time the kids are in fourth and fifth grade, it's like a habit. It's a
Mhm.
habit, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the community building circles can work in different ways depending on the school, the teacher's comfort level, the students. So um, it can be used for different purposes. One, in the very beginning of the year and throughout the year, can be used to build community and to build relationships. So the teacher could come up with some questions like, um, tell us something that you like to do when you're not in school, just little get to know you kinds of questions. But there are certain requirements in a community building circle, and we call them shared agreements. And so the students agree to talk only when they have the talking piece, and you can use anything for a talking piece. The students have the right to say pass if they don't feel comfortable answering a question, that they don't comment on each other's statements because it's supposed to be a place where you can share without fear that someone's going to make a comment about what you said,
Mhm.
and to uphold the 6 principles. And the other times that I found it the most impactful were when we had a problem that involved most of the people in the classroom. And the kids would lead the circle. I would kind of just not say anything and just let them work out that conflict amongst each other by using that community circle model. And it was very effective. It'd be a lot quicker and easier for me to say, okay, listen, I don't like such and such, so this is what's going to happen. And I'm sure I would be repeating that over and over for every single time it kept happening, rather than the students problem solving. So I'll give you an example. So I was repeating myself at the end of every day. Hey, kids, you need to clean this room so the custodian doesn't have to do the work that you should be doing, da-di-da, nothing every day. And I was sick of it. So I said, okay, it's time for circle. One girl took over and she got out a pen and a paper, and they ended up coming up with a system that worked for everybody, and they assigned each other jobs and how to rotate the jobs. And that was the last time I had to say anything. So very effective for different reasons. I did some community building circles on Zoom for an elementary school in Providence right after George Floyd was murdered. And so that's another way when something happens that affects the community at large. It's a good way for students to talk because it's already been part of their daily lives. It's not like all of a sudden something happens and we're going to circle up. We circle up for lots of different reasons. And now something happened, let's talk about it. Any other questions? Okay, I do want to show one slide because this is actually pretty essential to all that we do in Kingian Nonviolence and this notion of agape. And this comes from that book, Stride Toward Freedom, in the chapter I told you about, Pilgrimage to Nonviolence. And Dr. King talks about 3 types of love in that chapter. And one is eros, which is romantic love. And these are from the Greek language. One is philia, which is friendly love. And then he talks a lot about agape. And so I was hoping that somebody might unmute and read this first part to us, if somebody could do that.
Robin, where are you referring to?
Right here on this beginning of the slide. Can you see that
We
slide?
don't see the slide.
Oh,
Slide.
I wonder why nobody could do it. All right, hold on one second.
Yep.
Pause. No wonder why I couldn't see everybody. Okay, here we go. All right, who would like to unmute and read that first paragraph or sentences?
I can read.
Thanks.
Agape is a love in which the individual seeks not his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Agape does not begin by discriminating between worthy and unworthy people or any qualities people possess. It begins by loving others for their sakes, to have love for the enemy neighbor from whom you can expect no good in return.
Thank you. And when you teach that to students, they shift from, I want to tell you something that somebody did to me because I want them to get in trouble, to, I need to tell you something because that person needs help. That's a new mindset for people. All right, and then the second one, could somebody read that?
I can. Oh, I'm gonna put my camera on. All right, agape is love in action. Agape is love seeking to create and preserve the community. It is insistence on community even when one seeks to break it. Agape is the willingness to go to any length to restore community. It is the willingness to forgive, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 to restore community. I can only close the gap in broken community by meeting hate with love.
Thank you. And finally, agape means a recognition of the fact that all life is interrelated. All humanity is involved in a single process. All men are brothers. To the degree that I harm my brother, no matter what he is doing to me, to that extent I am harming myself. Love, agape, is the only cement that can hold a broken community together. And so that, I wanted to kind of wrap up with that, because without this knowledge of agape, we don't really understand Kingian nonviolence. It is about, no matter what someone does to me, in my head, I'm thinking about how can I help that person because something's wrong and they need my help. And even young kids can understand that. It's almost like teaching really little ones the difference between telling and tattling. I tattle to get you in trouble. I tell to get you help. And that's what agape is. So any final questions before we say good night? Comments, questions?
I had one for you, Robin, actually. I was hoping to ask about something you mentioned earlier, that you had some experience in different schools having to sort of tweak the approach. I would just be curious to know kind of what maybe some of those tweaks looked like when they changed in different schools, but maybe also if there were a few things that stayed strongly consistent.
So the Kingian curriculum is consistent. How it's implemented in a school might look different. So for example, there's one school in East Providence that we've been working with, and that group of colleagues is already a connected, beloved community. They love each other, they have fun. They were a great group to work with. And so what we need to do with them is far less extensive than we might need to do with a school where there's conflict amongst staff, because if you're having conflict with staff and you can't fix that, how are you going to fix the conflicts with students or address them? And so we kind of just go into a school and ask them, what do they need from us? Like, what do you see as the biggest roadblocks to becoming a beloved community? What we ask schools to design their beloved community. What would that look like? And that's what we work towards. So what each school might need or want can look different. Basically, a lot of it's the same, but then there could be other kind of side pieces that are particular to a certain school.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to put in
Do
chat.
you work with people outside of Rhode Island, or do you stay in Rhode Island?
So what we do, Ellen, our work is in Rhode Island, but we have these institutes where anybody can come that works with us in a school setting or some kind of setting where they're educating young people. So like we're doing work with the Boys and Girls Club. A group home would be something that we could do work with. So there's so many schools in Rhode Island, we can't really spread ourselves too thin, but the institutes are really impactful. We're potentially going to do a winter institute. So
And do you have a website or something that lets us know when the institutes are?
Yep, I just put my email address in chat, and now I'm putting the website. Look up both of those. Let me make sure I know the dates. Yeah, please look at our website. We have a YouTube channel, so you can search us on YouTube, and we have some great videos for kids and, you know, different age levels of youth. That's another resource that you can look at. But I'd be happy to answer any other questions via email or phone call if you have, you know, something significant that you wanted to talk about.
Robin, thank you so much. This was really an excellent program. You know, one quick question, how the feedback that you may have received from parents, from families, how what you all shared and the community, beloved community, how did you see that? How did they bring that home? And I'm sure you received hopefully mostly positive feedback from parents. And I noticed on one of your points you said to teach students and families, and I was wondering if within whether it was parent nights or how you're able to incorporate this in training with parents and families. But thank you.
Yeah, at my school, the teachers who I trained conducted some parent workshops so parents could come. And we know that kids were going home and using the Kingian language when they were in conflicts. The parents are like, what? So that's why we developed the parent pamphlet or the guardian pamphlet, so that all families had the same like glossary, basically the Kingian language, so that they knew the principles and all the different stuff that we use when we talk about conflict. For the most part, very positive. You know, this is a difficult time in education, and teachers are being pushed to the limit with not mentioning race, and don't talk about, you know, they ban some books in some place, you know, so getting a leader on board is really important, who has the courage to lead for equity and justice. Thank you.
All right, are there any last questions? Oh, sorry, Robin.
No, I was just gonna say the same thing, so go ahead.
Just gonna ask if there's any last questions or comments.
Robin, when you approach, or do you approach schools with the Kingian nonviolence curriculum, or do they come to you and say, I think we could use this curriculum in our schools?
That's a super awesome question because we don't like to force anybody to do this. It's a voluntary thing. So teachers, like we did one school where they made every staff person attend and it was not good. And I knew it wasn't going to be good. It's the kind of thing that's grassroots and you grow it from the bottom up and top down. And so the people who aren't interested in the beginning kind of start coming along because they see, oh, look at the great things that are happening in our school because of this. Okay, this isn't as weird or terrible as I thought. And so we just are approached. Most of the time it's when teachers attend one of our institutes and then they go back to their school and they're like, we need to do this. And that's kind of how it works.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, I don't want to keep everybody. It is 8:04. I appreciate all of you so very much on this International Day of Peace that you came to just be present. And yeah, thank you so much. If you have any questions, you have my email address. You can look at our website. And you never know, we might meet again.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Take care.